Hi, and welcome to another video in Microsoft Agent Framework, where we will be using C#. And in this video, we're gonna take a deep dive into what settings you can set on the AI agent. So let me explain that in code, because whenever we make our agent by, in my case, an Azure OpenAI client here, we can just say create AI agent. And then it can be used, but it's nothing special. It doesn't have any system instructions or anything. So this will probably not be the common case for many people. Instead, what we see down here will be probably the common case in that you will set some instructions and you might set some tools for tool calling. I won't go into tools today. That will be in a separate video, but that's how you actually give them to an agent. And the instruction part is your system information. That's prompt engineering of how the agent should behave. In this case, that is a cool server dude, but it could be that it could speak like a pirate. It should respond back in French all the time, or whatever makes sense to give in order to guide the agent to be the way you want it. And these are just two of many different things you can set in here. And if you're fairly new to this, I might want you to skip the video from now on, because the rest of it is very, very high level, very, very deep on what things can do. But stick around if you want to see it all, but else know that instruction exists and tools exist, and you will be 95% of the way in what you want to do. But let's dive into, there are more options. So in order to use those options, I have built a little service provider, and I have set up OpenTelemetry. Those two have nothing to do with the agent themselves, but they can be used in the agent. So let's go to it. The first thing is, of course, that we can set the instructions. And as it says, it's optional system instructions, what OpenAI called developer prompt, and what many people other call the system prompt. Then we have an optional name for an agent. If you just use one agent and don't do anything with multi-agents, you might not need a name for an agent. It's not a mandatory thing. But if you do multiple agents, it's always nice to be able to see which agent did set what using its name. Then you can set a description. The description is not really something that the AI uses, but it's more these online stores where you can store the agents, like Azure OpenAI Foundry, where they can have descriptions up there on what the agent is. You can probably also use it in a multi-agent scenario, but it has nothing to do with the AI, the same for the name. Then, as we saw, there's tools that we'll cover in a separate video. And then it becomes a bit more advanced in that you can set a client factory. Client factory is actually something you might need if you're working with reasoning models and you want to change their reasoning level. This is a bit cumbersome to do. I hope at some point they will make it easier to set these. But right now, if you want to set reasoning, you need to do it with this client factory or with an option, an even further advanced option that we will see later on. But this actually impacts what level a reasoning model will have. If you run a non-reasoning model, this will not work. But in general, here you can set a lot of different things like temperature, if it's a non-reasoning model, and so on. And it's in general just all the low-level things that are in Microsoft Extensions AI down here. So probably we will not do it too much, and you can also see instructions come from behind the scenes here. There's the response format for structured output, but hopefully that will also be in a more easy to access manner once we are out of the preview. But if you need to set reasoning model, this is one of the ways. So if you set it to low, it will use less tokens, and if you set it to high, it will think more, be more intelligent, and so on. Next up is a logger factory, where you can set up normal Microsoft logging. In this case, I have put in a console logging. So it will log whatever the agent is doing out to the console, but you could save that log in somewhere else. So this is all about observability and traceability if you wish to have that. And finally, you can set up services, which is why I made the little service provider up here. In that where I made a dependency injection into some class called my special service. And if that services were to be used by tools here, it would then be on the fly be dependency injected into it. And that's the reason why we have the services. Finally, whenever we normally stop this, it ends here, but you can go in and turn an agent into an agent builder and add more things. This is where you can put middleware into the agent. So for example, OpenTelemetry, which is why we set this up here. And you can build your own middleware to put in here in any way. You have the .use like you have in normal .NET as well. So lots of options you can do here, which is way beyond what we are going to do in this video. And if we do all this and just ask what is the capital of France, and let's run it, we will see that it was the pirate one here. So we get some logging from the logger. We get a bunch of things from the OpenTelemetry that will probably be sent up somewhere else. And then we actually get the answer back in pirate speak here. So lots of additional output for your logging is the primary thing, but also right now it came back fairly quick because we had low reasoning. If we set it to high, it's a little short question, so we might not see too much difference, but it should think a little longer on what the capital of France is and come back to us with the same answer. But that's we can see the token output here was higher than before. So that is a way to set all this by just setting all the different options you can send here. But you can go even further, because if you go in and create an agent, you also have the option to set a chat client agent options. And in here, you can set the chat options, which is sort of the same as this one here, where we have all the things with the instruction, temperature, and such things. And you can also set reasoning effort here if need be. We also have something called AI Context Provider Factory, which is a place where you can go in and set different interceptions before and after the LLM call. You implement a AI context, and then you are able to have before invoking and after invoking of the call, so you can block stuff. In their own example repo, they use it for some memory and stop every question until the user have actually given their name, which is what they do in their example. We'll probably make a video on it at some point, but it's a fairly advanced topic, so we won't go into it in this scenario. The second one is chat message store factory. This is a way to save thread conversations, which we haven't talked about yet. But normally, for example, if you're on ChatGPT, you go in and can go to the sidebar and check your previous conversations. They are actually called thread conversations. And this is a place where you can hook in where should they be stored when a new thread comes along and such things. So you can store it in files, you can store it in vector stores and so on. But beyond that, we can of course set the instructions, the name, the description. We can set an ID. Haven't found any place this is used, probably just in some telemetry. And we can finally state if the chat client, which is behind the scene here, which can have some configuration if that should be used as is, or it should decorate some extra things onto it by default, for example, function calling by default and such things. But so you can go in and say, I want it as I configured it, or if the agent framework should add a bit more on here. So that is the chat client agent options. And beyond that, we also can get again the client factory, the logger factory as you saw before, and the services. So we're not short on very advanced different things we can set, and you probably might never use all of them. Again, you will probably use instructions and tools, and perhaps some setting of the reasoning effort, perhaps some logging if you need that. But it's nice to know that we can actually go so deep into the system if we want to. But that is everything there are when it comes to settings on the AI agent. See you on the next one.